Table not big enough for you, or maybe it's too big? You can change the number of rows and columns in your table in several ways. First, we need a table. Now, I've created one in this document for us to work with, so I'll go to the Layout menu and choose Next Spread. Here's the table we're going to be playing with. I'd like to add an additional row at the bottom. One way to do that is by putting the Type tool in the last cell of the table and then hitting Tab. Now I can continue typing and tabbing over and typing and so on, but as long as I'm in the last cell of the table, if I hit Tab, it'll add a row. So that's kind of interesting. But there's other ways to add rows and columns as well. Here's an easy way. Go to the Table menu and choose Insert Row or Column. In this case, I'll insert a row, and it'll ask you how many rows do you want to insert. I'm going to say insert 3 rows above this current row. Click OK, and boom, I've got all the rows I want. Same thing with columns. In this case, I'm going to insert from the context menu. Remember, you always get the context menu by right-clicking, or if you have a one-button mouse on the Mac, you control-click, and I can find the insert. I'm going to add a column this time, but instead of going to the table menu, I'm going to use the context menu, which remember you get by right-clicking, or if you have a one-button mouse on the Mac, you control-click, and I'll pick out the insert from the context menu, and then choose column. Again, how many columns do you want? Where do you want to put it? I'll put this one column to the right of the current column, and I'll see my column there. Now, remember, the current column is wherever the text cursor is flashing. What if I don't want this column anymore? Well, I'll just click in one of those cells to indicate which column I'm talking about, and go to Table menu or the Context menu, either one, delete this column, and it's gone. Here's another way to add or remove columns. We're going to go to the Table panel. The Table panel gives us all kinds of information. In this case, we have 31 rows in this table. It did all the counting for us. And if I want more, I simply click in here. I'll just use the arrow key on my keyboard to set it to 32, and you can see that it's adding rows. Well, we can't see it because it overset that. That's too bad. But I can also do the same thing by reducing the number of rows. Let's set it to maybe 26, go back to the original. And if I hit Enter, you'll see that it says, well, are you sure you want to do that? It's going to delete those rows. Yes, I'm sure. I'll click OK, and it removes it and goes back to the original. We could do the same thing with the number of columns in the table panel, but instead I'm going to show you a little trick. I always like the little tips and tricks. So instead of using the table panel or the context menu, if I want additional rows, I can simply click on the bottom edge here, and I'm not moving the mouse button yet, but I'm holding on the mouse button, and then I hold the Option key or Alt key on Windows and drag. And as I drag, it adds rows. Same thing goes in reverse. I'll click and then hold on the Option or Alt on Windows and drag up, and it removes those. Now, did you see that? It did not ask me, are you sure you want to delete those? It just deletes them. There's no warning there, so be careful when you're doing that. Same thing goes with the right edge of a table. I can click and then hold on Option or Alt on Windows and drag out, and it'll extend, or click and then hold on Option or Alt and drag to the left, and it deletes them without any warning. I'm going to undo that because I need that data, so Command-Z, Command-Z, Control-Z on Windows. Okay, now let me show you another interesting thing you can do. I'm going to click in this cell up here that says Product Sales, and I'll zoom in to 200% by pressing Command-2 or Control-2 on Windows. Scroll over a little bit, and what I want to do is I want this word to span across all 3 columns. How do I do that? Well, to span across columns, I need to merge these cells. And to merge these cells, I need to select them first. So to select multiple cells, you simply click and drag with the Type tool. Now to merge them, I go back up to the Table menu, and I choose Merge Cells. Now, it's one cell that goes across the entire width. If I want this text to be centered, I just center it. Remember, it's just text as though it were in a text frame. So I'll go to the paragraph mode of the control panel and say center it. There we go. Now it's centered in my cell. Merging cells works vertically as well. For example, I'll select all 3 of those cells and I'll say merge those, and you can see that it becomes one cell now. And all of the text that was in each of those cells kind of got merged together as well into a single, let's say a single story in the cell. Now what if you've merged cells together, but you actually didn't want them merged? What can you do then? You want to set it back to the way it was. Well, in that case, you go to the Table menu and you choose Unmerge Cells. Now we have all three cells again, but InDesign is not smart enough to remember what text was in each one of these cells, so that's something you're going to have to do manually. I'll just select that and cut it and paste it, and it's, this is one of those things that would be better handled with just undo if we could. But I wanted to show you that unmerge feature. There's also a way to split a cell into two. For example, let's say I wanted two different values in this cell. I'll click in that cell and come up to the table menu and choose Split Cell, either horizontally or vertically. Horizontally means put a horizontal line across the cell. Vertically means put a vertical cell. So now I have two cells inside of one, as it were. And I can type inside this one and put a different value. Once you have your basic table structure down, it's time to start paying attention to formatting it, making it more attractive. At least, I hope you want to make it more attractive than this. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be covering in the next movie. I've opened the Java Code magazine file from my exercise folder, and I want to jump to a table that I already have prepared. So I'll use the Pages panel to jump there. I'll open the Pages panel, and I'll scroll down by clicking and dragging in the blank area over here on the side of the pages, and I'll just click and drag down until I get to pages 8 and 9. Then I'll double-click on the 8-9 spread, and it jumps right there. Close the Pages panel, and I'm ready to go. Okay, let's make this table look a tad bit better. The basic tool for formatting a table is the Table Options dialog box. But before we go to that dialog box, we need to know a couple of things. First, you can only get there by having the Type tool selected inside the table. So I'm going to double-click on one of the cells, which switches to the Type tool and places the cursor inside the table. Second thing is, I don't want to have these hidden characters turned on, so I'll go to the Type menu, and I'll hide hidden characters. That makes all of those go away. And the third thing is, see all these blue lines on the columns and rows? Well, that's not actually blue lines, that's the edges of the frame. So we want to turn off the edges of our frame so we can actually see what the real table looks like. So I'll go to the View menu and choose Hide Frame Edges. There we go. There's our black row and column strokes. That's actually what it's going to look like when it prints. Okay, now I'm ready to open the Table Options dialog box. Oh, let me zoom in first. Command 1, go to 100%, or Control 1 on Windows, and then I'll scroll up here so we have a little bit of room and we can see what we're doing. Then I'll go to the Table menu and choose Table Options, and then Table Setup. The Table Options dialog box, which I'll just move off to the side here, gives us all the control over the table as a whole. Not individual cells, but the table as a whole. So we can control the number of rows and columns and all that sort of thing. I'll be discussing header rows and footers in a later movie. In fact, I'm not going to talk about all of the features in this dialog box. There's just too many of them. But I am going to talk about the important ones. What do I want around the edge of my table? In this case, I have a 1-point black line. So I could change that to any other color I want. For example, I could say, why don't I use this dark green color that I've saved in here. Any of the colors that are in the swatches panel will show up here in this list. So I'll make it dark green, and maybe I'll make it a little bit less thick, maybe a half-point line. So we can see we have a nice, delicate line around our table now. The table spacing feature has to do with how much space is before and after the table. Remember, tables are always in a text frame. So if you have a table in the middle of a text frame, in the middle of a story, let's say you've got text before it and text after it, this controls the amount of space before the table and then after the table, in between the table and the text. I'm going to skip past these two stroke panels, and I'll go to the Fills panel by clicking on it. Now this lets me control an alternating pattern of fills. This is wonderful. If I click on the pop-up menu, we can see that we can apply a fill every other row, every second row, every other column. I'm just going to choose this every other row feature, and we can see that immediately we get an interesting effect. I find this much easier to read tables when they look like this. But instead of choosing black, I'm going to go back to my dark green color. And maybe I'll make it a little bit lighter. Maybe I'll just set this to 10% tint instead. So the first row is going to be 10% of that dark green. And then the next row is going to be, I'll choose the dark green again. Maybe make it lighter than that. How about 25%? That looks pretty good. Now I have alternating tints between one row and the next. I could also skip some rows if I wanted to. Let's say I'll skip the first few rows. You can see how the tint is actually removed from those. But in this case, I'm going to set this back to 0 because I actually do want those to be formatted right now. The row strokes and column strokes are very similar. They let you control the row strokes and the column strokes and what they're going to look like, especially when you want them alternating. For example, I could choose every other column should have a different alternating stroke, so thick, thin, something like that. Let's make this much thicker, and you can get a sense of what I mean. There we go, thick, thin. I'm not going to be doing this because I want all of the column strokes and all the row strokes to be the same in this particular table, so I'll set this back to none. The last panel in the Table Options dialog box, Headers and Footers, is a topic that I'm going to be covering in a later movie in this chapter. Okay, this table is definitely looking a lot better already, but there's more work to be done. The next step is to format the data in the cells and then look at how to apply custom formatting to individual cells.